All right. So, welcome to 2025. Are
Yeah,
you hands on?
episode 11. Can you
Yes.
believe it?
Yes.
So, something that's
And
been on our mind for a while, actually, between the two of us and in general, in I think a lot of areas, is creativity in 2025 in the world of AI. Where do
yes.
we sit with our creativity? How do we build creativity yet not lose the power of AI and just say, no, that's not for me? So, it's interesting. I did ask ChatGPT today, what's the difference between craft and creativity? So how would you answer the difference between craft and creativity?
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because I wouldn't normally pair those two against each other. I would think like craft or fine art, but I would say craft to me speaks to the techniques involved in creating something, whereas creativity speaks more of the actual act of creating.
Yeah,
Whether it's in a medium, like I can be creative in language, and I can also have a craft, know the craft of language, for instance, or
yeah,
music, or yeah. But that
yeah. I
that's
mean, to
my
me,
own, yeah.
the big thing is I don't know somebody who said they met and he was a pianist and met another pianist, and the guy could take any sheet music and play it. The
Yes.
one guy, and the other guy was like just could take any piece and jazz,
Hmm.
go crazy on the jazz side.
Right.
And to me, the one is Croft, an
Yes.
incredibly skilled pianist, read
Yes.
music, but just like no create, he
Yep.
saw it, he played it, done.
That's right. Yep. And it's interesting. Yes, I like the way you said that because when the two come together is when you have, real genius, when you have somebody
Yeah, yeah.
who's got that passion and then they develop that craft. But I like what you're saying there. To bounce it back to you, would you say out of those two areas, which is AI is better at this
I would
current
say
state?
AI is better at the craft.
Yes. Yes. It's just faster than humans. That's why it can like sort of attempt many different avenues.
I mean, I asked ChatGPT now, are you creative? And he
Yeah, he. Oh, but they personified it for us. Yeah.
um it is like yes and no.
Right.
It, the AI cannot come up with original thought. I think that is the absolutely primary thing that we have to acknowledge in this whole discussion.
Right. Hmm.
AI cannot come up with original thought. It's just impossible because it can come up with original insight and it can come up with original relationships between data,
Yes.
but it can't come up with original thought.
Right.
And I think that ultimately is the domain of humans.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I've been tracking for the last 10 or so years. The World Economic Forum releases this thing they call the future of jobs, and it's evolving over, every year they release a new one. And it's interesting how over the last 10 years, the focus has gone more and more into these softer skills like leadership, creativity, influence, things that you you can get an assistant or a digital robot to start doing things, but there's still an element of what is it that's essentially the human that has to co-pilot or partner with this thing. And I think that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I
Creativity
mean,
being a big one.
an example is I was trying to solve a problem, a UX kind of design problem, and I was stuck. So I left it yesterday. First thing this morning, I get up, I'm still like half asleep. Boom, the solution comes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's out, so different to where my train of thought was.
That's right. That's right.
I'll explain in detail later, but it flipped the whole solution upside down and said, kind of, you're looking at this the wrong way.
Yes.
And
Would you go ahead?
I don't believe that AI can't kind of prompt you and said, hey, that problem you had 2 days ago, I got a solution for you.
Right.
Whereas your
Right.
brain can do that. It's like, that problem you've been sitting on for 2 days. Like I finally have that solution here. You want to know about it.
Right, right. Yeah, like almost like it was a sleeper thread somewhere in the background. It just came to the front. Um, and but it's interesting because on an AI, and I'm just thinking back to the idea of original thought, I completely agree with you. But if we think down in detail, there's a setting when they're generating the tokens, right?
Yeah,
And that setting determines, it's called temperature, and it determines basically how it selects the most likely next word. And if the temperature is set, fairly strong, it's going to select the most likely word. So that's really going to start to default back to whatever was in the training data or
yeah,
an average, an aggregate of that. But I think it's interesting that if, let's say you turn that temperature down and it starts now inserting the most least likely words. I'm
yeah.
not saying that it's going to in itself generate a new thought, but maybe the human reading it, right?
Ah, yes.
In that interchange, like that feedback, it might stimulate new human
Okay.
pathways. Yep.
So now the question is, now we know that AI is not creative
Right.
in a human sense.
Right.
So how do we use it as a tool to be creative?
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really the key to this whole partnership, call it that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yes.
if if I wanted to design something, let's say I want to design a piece of furniture, I will normally sketch, 5 or 6 or 7 different ideas down,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the create process, is to throw down as many ideas as possible and
Yes.
see which one, kind of sticks and which one you like. And I think you could, and that can take time, especially if you go into detail. But I think with the AI, and this is what I've heard from, the woodworking community, is they will use the AI to generate those 10 variations.
Mm. Mm.
So in
Yes.
other words, give it to me, mid-century, say here's kind of a starter. I want it mid-century modern, I want it gothic, I want it, arts and crafts, I want it. And then
Yes.
now it's done the sketching for you, but
Mm.
not, okay, I like that part and that part. I don't like that. Let's change this. And I think
Yes.
that's fundamentally where I see this going.
Yeah, and I think, I can just sound back at that exactly how I've used it in sort of my one of my most, creative coding areas is making video games and little learning games. And where I used to sort of dive in and design it in my head as I'm coding, right? And often I will hit limitations that I didn't see at the very beginning, right? And they might be anything from I got the whole gamification part wrong or choose the wrong architecture. But now, in the last two or three of those, I've sort of had this pre-planning conversation where I've explored my options out, right? And it would be the same normal practice if I was doing it with a software development team, right? So it's like having that feedback in there, but the fact that it sort of gives me, like you said, out of all those options, it now gives me out of seven that I might have thought of, three options that somebody else, in the training data thought of. Now, all of a sudden, I'm approaching this so much more creatively, right? I'm doing things that I wouldn't have even known possible only because of its little guidance. So, yeah.
I think that is true, and it's it's that repetitive, nature that we can get it to give us 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different things, no matter what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's an essay or it's you know, a design or a picture, or I mean, when we're creating logos or things,
Yes.
we'll ask it for like 7 different ones, change this, tweak that, and then we'll pick one.
Yes.
I mean,
That's
it's
it.
not really creative. It's only if you pick one and then, to me, take that design a step further. Is like if you just take it what it's given you, well, then you've just picked one.
Right.
But if
Right.
you had to take it and then take the next step and kind of personalize that, then the creativity comes in.
Absolutely, yes. And it makes me think too. I have this conversation a lot with Nicole, my wife, because she's a photographer, and sort of there was a time when there wasn't a thing called Photoshop or photo editing. And so the craft, of taking a photo and making it very professional or editing it was very manual. And then when Photoshop came out, there was this sense of, okay, that this is just now replacing that craft, but it ended up democratizing it and bringing a creative element to that craft. Now, now we have a graphic design industry where we just had, people cutting photographs. Yeah.
Cut and paste. That's where it originated.
Exactly. Yeah. And so one of the things I'll say too is I think that the original thought thing too is one of the hurdles that will be overcome, because I think the answer is in the seed of what you said there about, it can make connections and relationships. And I think on a fundamental level, that's what creativity is doing. Like, I just want to go back to your example that you coming up with a solution when you're half asleep. Guys like Thomas Edison and Salvador Dali, part of their creative process was to put themselves in a position where they would fall asleep at their desk. Edison had these keys and Dali had these metal balls. And once they would actually fall asleep, the balls or keys would hit something and wake them up. And then Edison, would write in his notebook, or Dali would sketch in his pad. And I think that it's like the human goes into a different mind state, and connections that aren't available normally in your normal waking time happen, and you get the solution. I think right now AI is still in that first state, but once it matures, we might start getting, in some of those small narrow domains it's given us new ways of folding proteins, that humans never put in the training data, or designing architecture of chips. But those are very narrow to what human creativity can do.
But I also think there is a sense, if you, like a musician, who could be suddenly somewhere. I remember Mark Knopfler saying he was in a shop looking for kitchen appliances, and he just stood there and watched all these guys moving stuff, and that's where he came up with Money for Nothing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And to me, that's seeing something, but it's like, that's a completely different dimension to, it would be very difficult. Those aren't relationships that already exist in his mind. I get it. When we're trying to solve problems, we've looked at the problem, we've understood the problem, we've got all that information in our brain, and our brain's just taking time to, and yes, I agree, the AI, but there's this another thing, like a way of being creative that comes so outside, and it's just like not what you're thinking about at all.
Yeah, no temperature setting would account for it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. You know what I mean? No pre-existing relationships. You could just be walking down the road, walking the dog on the beach or whatever, and suddenly a song can come to you, a rhythm, and it's like, that to me is the absolute essence of creativity.
Yeah, and what you said there too about the proactive, a couple of minutes earlier you talked about they won't come and spark you. I think that's also a thing. It's like nobody told Mark Knopfler to respond that way. And it's like the AI is not, not going to sit on a desk and all of a sudden hear or see something and then create. It's like, even if it did, all of the choices around what to create and will that resonate? What am I trying to communicate in this creation? Those are all like sort of inherent motivations in Mark Knopfler because he's a human. How do you program that into an AI? I can't even imagine.
Every country, what was that? I read somewhere that when all vehicles become self-driving, you'll get country western songs about how my truck left me.
Yes, that's great. Yes. I mean,
and I think a lot of, if you think about that, that's somebody trying to process what they're going through in life, and craft, creativity is a way of processing that. Art is a way of processing that, of dealing with what we're going through and how we're going through and expressing our emotions. And, a lot of craft and creativity is based on our emotions.
Yes. And, a lot of, as we know, the underpinnings of that AI really is about math. And it works best when the problem can be reduced down to a what they call an error function that can judge how close am I to the answer. And art doesn't have that answer. You know, it's like your error function might be very different than mine, looking at the same thing.
Yeah, well, I was once we have here, as you know, the art walk, and I was once in looking at a piece of art, and somebody asked me, "What's the point of art?"
Hmm.
I mean, it's a really, really good question in the age of
Yeah.
science, and to
Hmm.
me, that it was to elicit an emotional response. That's the only
Yes.
point of art.
Yes. 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 Because
You don't
in
have
that,
those
yeah,
pictures on the
that's right.
back there. They all mean something to you personally.
That's right.
There's an emotional connection.
That's
And
right.
at that point, I wasn't living here. So I said, I have pictures of, Cape Town and the sea because I wasn't living near the sea. So there's a connection back to it. It tells
That's
me
right.
something every time I look at it.
That's right.
And I think,
This was our honeymoon in Cuba. We bought this from a street artist.
yeah.
So I
And,
know exactly what you mean. Yes.
you can look at that from a purely craft point of view, or you can look at it from that was there's a connection there. And that, I
Mhm.
mean, the thing with food and taste and smell, man, that is the most powerful thing in the world to connect you back to an event or a place or a childhood.
Mm.
Um, so
Yes.
to me, creativity, art is that, but just jumping a bit of a tangent or
Hmm.
jumping just sideways is now with younger people coming in to craft, be it our craft of software or craft of, whatever
Hmm.
it is,
Yes.
that AI or CNC or 3D printing has invaded into. um, how do we enable people to, when everything's done for you, how do you create and learn to create and learn to be creative and learn to have original thought? Suppose that's
Yep.
the question. In this modern world where I don't need to go and think about how I'm going to find the information or have a whole lot of information, think how am I going to collate this? Because that is easy now.
Yep.
It's like, what do I do with it? How do I have creative thought? How do I, now that I don't have to build the form in software, how do I have creative thought about what that form should do? And how do I express that to the AI? Because
Hmm.
sometimes you
Yep.
and I know it's in the design's in our head. We
Yes.
have no freaking way of expressing it.
That's right.
We moan about our clients not writing down requirements, but Don, we've got to get those requirements down now. And
Yes.
so it's like a whole different way of thinking about our job and what we do, and then saying, no, but that's so not on. I'm not going to use your code. I'll write it from scratch. Uh,
Yeah, you bring up an interesting thing that I've also noticed a little bit in myself. Is when the first image generating AIs came out, and I really dove into it and understood the technology, and I went through a wildly creative phase where I thought, man, I'm going to be wanting to create images forever. But I at a certain point, a couple weeks in, ran out of ideas of things to create because I'm not a visual artist, right? So my creativity hasn't been trained to really think of creative things. So I've seen people that exhausted that in a couple days. So just having the ability, like, to partner with the creative engine or AI doesn't necessarily train our motivation to be creative. And there's so many, I guess, temptations to be a consumer rather than a creator these days, right? So
yeah,
I think AI does present the potential distraction for guys, like you said, or younger guys who in the past, maybe out of passion would have learned a craft. Now they might just that same passion will go into being entertained.
yeah.
Do you know what I
So
mean?
it's interesting when in South Africa, when I was part of a church, we generated all our own material because overseas material was prohibitively expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So, they say necessity is the mother of all invention. And so it
Mm-hmm.
forced us to create. It
Yes,
forced us to think about what we were doing, how we were teaching, what we were teaching. And then
that's
I
right.
went to America, and there was just the whole church was consumer.
Yeah. Yep.
Nobody knew the art of building a lesson,
Right.
of putting together a sermon, of creating. It was all some, I just go buy the magazine, I buy the study manual, I download the video, and we create this whole creator, thing. And it used to frustrate the heck out of me. And like, I want to hear what's in your heart, not what somebody else is saying on the subject. And
that's right.
I want to see how you solve the problem. What are you thinking? Not, oh, this is how 5 other people do it. And I think that is going to be critical for the modern generation to learn that.
It's so true. And this is where, interestingly, that there's been debates about how, in some ways, third world countries might benefit in the future. I saw this firsthand in Cuba. When I was in the Bahamas, we took a group of high school students to Cuba for 2 weeks. We met up with a group of high school students there at a church, Presbyterian church, the center of Havana. And just watching the difference, every single one of those kids in Cuba, because it was in their schools, already knew how to play an instrument, already had a good sense of themselves. One of the guys said he wanted to be an art critic. This was a high school student who understood and appreciated art to want to be an art critic. And our students, all they had was their iPods. This was when iPods first came out, right? And they all knew the new artists' music and stuff and videos, but there was none of them that had learned any kind of craft at all in any of these. And it was just like, that was, 15, 20 years ago. And this is where I think that, some emerging cultures, emerging countries and economies actually, like you said, force you to learn skills that in the future might actually benefit. So I do think AI is going to shake things up, and maybe the third world is in a better position with our motivation,
I mean, I know when South Africa was, in during, the 80s and the early 90s when we were isolated, we had to, figure out everything ourselves.
That's right.
We couldn't just go to the local Chinese shop.
That's right.
And we couldn't order from Temu. You couldn't do those. You had to create. And now it's just so easy. And it's going to be difficult for people to learn creativity, but I think we've got to push people to be creative.
Right.
And inspire people to be creative and teach people to be creative.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I really like about my relationship with you is the way that you bring creativity in, you demythologize it in a certain sense. You bring it down into the practical, and not just with code, but I mean, like, when we did our event and you drew the pictures to guide our symbol thinking in the language, it's like, that's in my mind the most potent creativity. Yes, every once in a while somebody puts a painting that can sell for $1 million, but that's actually a whole nother thing. It influences people differently. The kind that's integrated into your daily living. And so that I appreciate you are a very creative person in your daily living.
And I had no plan on doing that. I walked from, I was going to sit down and do something else. I walked from one room to another. And by the time I came back, my evening's plan had changed.
Yes. And being open to that change is a big part of creativity, right?
Yeah. And I think allowing yourself to respond to those changes and to those thoughts and entertain them, I think, is the ultimate, and not be so busy. I mean, I was speaking to, another developer, and I'm like, no. Design fast, fail fast, retry fast.
Yes.
That's the essence. A lot of what we're doing, especially, if you're figuring out if a UX is going to work or not, don't put a lot of time and thought into it. Just like, go take an idea, get it into something, try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, bugger it. You haven't wasted a week. You've wasted a day.
That's right.
Try it again, until you find something that works. And I think we're too scared to kind of do and fail, because we've been taught our whole life at school that failing is bad.
Right. Get it right. Yeah.
Whereas often in business, and especially in software development, failing's good. It's like, build it. It's like, does it work? No. Okay, well, we know that idea sucks. Let's go on to the next one.
And in a certain sense, we're going right back to how AI is able to mimic craft is by failing quickly millions of times and evaluating each response and deciding for itself before it presents the answer, this is our
Yeah,
best answer. And
yeah,
isn't that the same thing? It's like every prompt is eliciting that same training, but it just happens in milliseconds rather than, decades you've invested in your woodworking, for instance.
yeah. And often in my mind, I will, if I'm going through solutions, I will, take that solution and kind of play it out, all the different scenarios in my mind. I'm like, oh no, that one's not going to work. Okay.
Yes.
Next scenario. Oh, that's not going to work before I've ever created anything.
Yes. Yes.
But sometimes we just need to visualize and use it. So build it. If it doesn't work, trash it, carry on.
That's right. Yeah, and that's how these guys built AI for the last 50 years.
So creativity, I think we've got to start be more with original thought, and I think
That's
that's
right.
what businesses so crave is. I
Yes,
mean, none of us saw the iPhone coming,
that's
except
right.
Android was around before the iPhone, but that's beside the point.
Sure.
You know, but we, but it was also built on something, but it was built on and then sideways. You know what I mean?
That's
The
right.
touch screen, we had touch screens and we had
Hmm.
smartphones, and
That's right.
somebody just went, you know what? These little keyboards suck. I have big fingers. Why don't we put the two of those things together?
That's right. That's right. And at the same time, the size and cost of chips and memory went down. So it was a perfect storm of now the hardware can support, that vision. And I agree with you. I think there was even a prototype that was 10 years previous to the iPad where they were doing touch screens there's a video on YouTube about it where a newspaper company somewhere in the US, Midwest, commissioned these guys. They came up with this prototype, even demoed it, and the guys shot it down. But they basically they couldn't think outside of their box of, advertising world and how they made money. But it proves sometimes that the hardware has to meet the right creative thought. And when
Yeah. You got to have the tools to implement the craft. I mean, that's a lot of Da
Mhm.
Vinci stuff. He
Yes,
had these brilliant ideas. He just never had the technology to absolutely, do it,
right, to build a helicopter.
to build a helicopter.
That would have been hilarious. You could see it would have freaked people out.
And I think that's a lot of it, and now we
Yeah,
have the technology. We can do pretty much anything, but it's like,
yeah, and that's great that we're coming back to basically we're only limited by our creativity now.
yeah.
That gets even more true, every year that goes by.
And I think it's just sad to me. I see Meta and all of that using, apparently, I was reading they've burnt like billions of dollars with the metaverse thing and
Hmm.
virtual worlds, and it's just gone nowhere.
Right.
So you have
And
all
yeah,
these people, all this creativity, and yet we've got all sorts of other problems that the world really needs solving, and all these creative people are essentially just wasting time and money and effort.
and Apple did the same thing with their Vision Pro goggles, AR
Yeah,
goggles. They spent, I think, $14 billion over the last 5 years, and they canned it last month.
people just don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's an example of just like you said, it's like craft going away from, the real creative inspiration. It's like, yes, we can build it, let's build it, but it really wasn't inspired by anything lasting. We don't need
Yeah,
that.
and I think that's it. Ultimately,
Hmm.
our creativity has to lead to the greater good, to be something, to be better, to make a better society. If
Yes,
not,
yes.
unless
Wow,
it's
this
food,
this is a
food's
good
fine.
been yes. Yeah, well, this has been a really good chat like always. And
Yeah,
yeah, I look forward to our next one.
yes, absolutely. All
You have a
right,
great
cheers.
have a great day.